Welcome back to Apex Sci-Fi. The galaxy is a place of light, billions of stars, nebulae and glowing gas giants. But there are pockets of the universe where the light never reached. Places like Nox Prime. Nox Prime is a rogue planet, a world ejected from its star system millions of years ago, drifting in the absolute zero of the interstellar void. It has no sun. It has no moon. It is a world of jagged obsidian mountains, frozen nitrogen plains, and a darkness so thick it feels like a physical weight against your skin. The Umbra-Khul, a species of predatory multi-limbed insectoids, called this frozen hell home. They evolved without eyes, sensing the universe through thermal vibrations and echolocation. To the Umbra-Khul, darkness was their greatest weapon. They had spent centuries raiding the fringes of the Galactic Council, slipping onto worlds during the night, harvesting entire colonies, and vanishing back into the shadows before the first light of dawn. The Council fleets couldn't find them. Their sensors were blinded by the natural magnetic interference of Nox Prime's core. Every expeditionary force sent into the dark of Nox Prime had been slaughtered within hours, hunted like cattle in a dark barn. Then the Council called the humans. The Terran 14th Mud Eaters Division didn't arrive with elegant lightships or high-tech scanners. They arrived with thousands of orbital drop shovels and millions of tons of reinforced concrete. They didn't try to scout the dark. They invaded it. They landed in the middle of a frozen nitrogen sea, dug their boots into the black mud and began to dig. The darkness doesn't belong to the bugs anymore, Sergeant Silas Graves muttered, spitting a wad of tobacco into the oily black slush at the bottom of Trench 4. Now it belongs to the infantry. Graves was a veteran of 3 Death World campaigns. His skin was the color of old parchment, and his eyes were permanently squinted from years of staring through thermal scopes. He wore the Mark 9 Night Stalker power armor, a heavy blocky suit designed not for speed, but for survival in absolute zero. For 6 months, the war on Nox Prime had devolved into something the galaxy thought was a relic of the ancient past, trench warfare. The Umbra-Khul couldn't be targeted from orbit, so the humans had to take the ground meter by meter. They built a network of trenches that spanned hundreds of miles, a zigzagging scar of steel and fire across the obsidian plains. The life in the trenches was a nightmare of cold and noise. The temperature outside the suit was minus 200 degrees. If your life support flickered for a second, you were a frozen statue. The Umbra-Khul were everywhere, above, below, and in the walls. They would phase through the loose obsidian soil, dragging soldiers into the dark before a shot could be fired. Status report. Graves barked over the squad's encrypted shortwave radio. Perimeter is quiet, Sarge, Corporal Miller replied, his voice shivering despite the heaters. Too quiet. The vibration sensors have been flat for 10 minutes. The bugs are planning something. Graves checked his Mark 7 kinetic rifle. He didn't use plasma. Plasma was too bright, it blinded the thermal goggles. He used 20mm thumper rounds, heavy slugs designed to shatter the Umbra-Khul's chitinous carapaces through sheer kinetic force. Suddenly the vibration sensors didn't just beep, they screamed. Contact. The ground in front of the trench exploded as dozens of Umbra-Khul tunnel reapers burst through the mud. They were terrifying creatures 10 feet long with 6 blade-tipped limbs and mandibles that could snap through reinforced steel. They didn't make a sound. They were just shadows moving in the dark. Flares. Light them up. Graves roared. A dozen magnesium flares shot into the sky, exploding in a blinding, artificial white light. To the Umbra-Khul, whose thermal sensors were tuned to the absolute zero of the planet, the flare was like a nuclear explosion. They screeched, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the soldiers' teeth, and momentarily recoiled. Give them hell. The trench erupted in a wall of gunfire. The thump-thump-thump of the human rifles was a rhythmic heartbeat in the chaos. Graves leaned over the parapet, his rifle spitting fire. He saw a reaper lunging toward Miller. Graves didn't aim, he acted on instinct. He fired a 3-round burst that caught the creature in its midsection, blowing its thorax into a spray of frozen black ichor. Keep the line. Bayonets out. The Umbra-Khul didn't retreat. They were a swarm. They used the bodies of their fallen to fill the trench works, crawling over the dead to reach the humans. The fight became a brutal, claustrophobic melee. Graves felt a heavy weight slam into his back. He was knocked face down into the black mud. A reaper was on top of him, its mandibles snapping inches from his helmet's neck seal. Graves couldn't reach his rifle. He reached for the monofilament bayonet at his thigh, a blade that vibrated at a molecular frequency. He jammed the blade upward under the creature's head. The vibrating steel sliced through the Umbra-Khul's armored neck like it was water. Graves rolled the carcass off him and stood up, covered in the oily black slime of the planet. The battle raged for 3 hours. The humans were being pushed back. The flares were running low and the darkness was reclaiming the trench. "Sarge, they're breaking through on the left flank. We're being overrun." Graves looked at the horizon. He knew they couldn't win a defensive fight anymore. The Umbra-Khul had the numbers. The humans had the fire. "Listen up, 14th. Graves' voice boomed over the wideband channel. "They think they own the night because we're sitting in holes waiting for them. They think we're afraid of the dark. We're going to show them that on Earth the dark is just where we hide our teeth. Fix bayonets. We're going over the top." "Over the top? Sarge, that's suicide," Miller yelled. "No, son," Graves said, his voice cold and certain. "That's being a human. On 3. 1, 3. Charge." 300 human soldiers leaped out of the mud and onto the obsidian plains. They didn't run with grace, they ran with the heavy, thudding power of machines. They activated their dawn charges, specialized incendiary grenades that burned at 5,000 degrees. The obsidian plain was illuminated by a line of fire. The humans were a wall of steel and flame, screaming war cries that had been passed down through 1,000 years of terrestrial conflict. The Umbra-Khul for the first time in their history felt terror. They were the hunters of the dark, but they were being hunted by something that brought its own sun. The humans didn't fire from a distance, they got close. They used their bayonets to gut the reapers, their heavy boots to crush the smaller drones, and their sheer stubborn weight to break the swarm. Graves was at the front. He was a demon of fire and mud. He emptied his rifle into the mass of shadows, then used the butt of the weapon to shatter a reaper's skull. He moved with a manic, rhythmic violence, a persistence hunter who refused to let the prey escape. By the time the dawn charges burned out, the plains of Nox Prime were covered in the smoking remains of the Umbra-Khul swarm. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the heavy breathing of the human survivors. The Umbra-Khul retreated into the deep tunnels of the planet. They never raided a council world again. They had learned that in the deep dark, there was something much scarier than a predator. There was a human with a shovel and a grudge. The Galactic Council later asked Sergeant Graves how his men survived the psychological trauma of the eternal night. They couldn't understand how a species that evolved under a sun could fight so effectively in a place without light. Graves, sitting in a debriefing room with his helmet off, finally revealing his tired, scarred face, just shrugged. "The dark isn't a problem for us," Graves said. "We spent thousands of years telling stories about the monsters in the dark. We spent thousands of years being afraid of the things that go bump in the night. But eventually we realized something." "What's that?" the Council Inquisitor asked. Graves looked him in the eye. "We realized that the only reason we were afraid of the monsters in the dark was because we hadn't met them yet. And once we met them, we realized that we were the scariest things in the room all along. The dark doesn't hide the monsters from us. It hides us from the monsters." The humans didn't leave Nox Prime. They turned the trenches into cities. They brought artificial suns and built factories in the Obsidian Mountains. They became the guardians of the rogue world, the ones who stand watch in the eternal night. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. If you think you're the scary thing in the dark, you haven't met a human in a trench. If you enjoyed this brutal battle for Nox Prime, hit that like button. Comment below, what is your biggest fear about the dark? Subscribe for the next front of the Iron Vanguard, the battle for Tokyo Arcology. The flares are out. The night is ours.